Hello everyone. We're going to talk today about SPLA audits, about service provider license agreement audits conducted by auditors on behalf of Microsoft. Who we are? A company called SAMexpert. We support everybody during audits on the client side, during negotiations, after audits, or when you need to renew your agreement. We have other Microsoft-related services, and importantly, we don't sell licenses ourselves, so we don't care about sales. We only earn our bread and butter by helping clients to defend themselves against Microsoft and optimizing the budget. And the reason why you should listen to us, if you are not one of our followers, is that we have supported over 100 clients in audits on the client side against the audits in Microsoft. And we have a 100% win rate. Whichever the situation is, our clients come out of audits with lower bills compared to what they would have paid if we didn't support them. This event is predominantly for service providers or SaaS companies or ISV companies that host something using Microsoft licenses where there's an element of SPLA. But if you're not a service provider and if you're a regular company, you will also learn a few things about how Microsoft conducts audit and what are your rights and obligations during various phases of the audit from this event anyway, because many things are similar between SPLA audits and regular Microsoft audits. With me today, I have Daryl Ullman. I will invite him when we're going to be discussing negotiations. The last phase of any audit is the negotiation of its result. And he will join me. He is the Chief Negotiation Officer in our company and the co-founder, a partner in SAMexpert. I hope that you can get home actionable advice. This is not a sales pitch, although by all means you're welcome if you need our help. You can always find us on LinkedIn, on our website SAMexpert.com. But today is all about sharing what we know and advice that you can effectively DIY. You can do it yourself. And to remind you, we're talking about SPLA audit. So what is a SPLA audit essentially, if you don't know yet? If you're a service provider, or if you work for a service provider, Microsoft conducts compliance audits, like they used to conduct with every other company in the past, and there are still enterprise compliance audits. Service providers, however, are in a very interesting niche. Service providers provide services with Microsoft licenses included, and sometimes also allow clients to bring their own licenses to their estate. There is no entitlement, as in a usual Microsoft environment. Providers don't have licenses. Providers are required to calculate the consumed licenses during a calendar month and then submit that data to Microsoft and pay for it every month. There are exceptional agreements where reporting can be done quarterly, but it's not a usual arrangement. Usually, every calendar month, you have to report to Microsoft what licenses your clients consumed via your reseller, and then you have to pay for it. And what this SPLA audit essentially is by looking at your current data, they will be trying to estimate how many licenses you are required to report in every calendar month for the period of the audit. They will tell you, we're going to audit you back for 3 years. That means they will try and extrapolate 36 months of your reporting history and compare it with what you reported, what you paid for. And any under-reporting, anything that you did not report correctly, you didn't follow the rules, you forgot to ask your clients about bring your own license evidence, will be your penalty. They are verifying that you paid enough for each calendar month in that audit period. And the audit basically is split into two big phases. The first phase is the technical phase. The technical phase during which the auditor appointed by Microsoft, usually one of the big four companies, and I'm saying usually, we've never seen anybody else. We're only dealing with audits where auditors are one of the big four consulting companies, famous consulting companies. Microsoft sends them, and they ask you to provide inventory data, they ask you to provide your relevant records, they compare it with the reporting history, they discuss your environments with you, and then they produce the reports. The auditors, during the technical phase, which is, I wouldn't say it's the longest, sometimes negotiations take longer, but it's the most complicated part in terms of steps and process and things you need to pay attention to. When they disengage, Microsoft comes back and start negotiating. Rather, you start negotiating with Microsoft, because Microsoft's initial goal is just to bill you for the licenses you didn't pay for, according to what auditors calculated. So there are two big phases. One is with the auditor, and the second one is with Microsoft. And savings are achieved at both stages. If you neglect one of the stages, some providers completely neglect the technical one, they make mistakes, they come to negotiations with an inflated bill, much higher than it should have been, and they have to negotiate from a higher number. Just imagine, this is not a hypothetical scenario. Imagine a client that had to start negotiating from $120 million of non-compliance. Instead of $30 million, that was the actual non-compliance. There are various reasons why it happens. Don't neglect the technical stage. It needs to be driven through very properly, navigated. I don't like the word navigated, thanks ChatGPT. It has to be navigated through very properly, very meticulously, with attention to detail. Magic happens during the negotiation phase. It's when you present your business case, your business excuses, your situation, and you negotiate with Microsoft. You negotiate the outcome, sometimes reducing the bill from what the auditors calculated, sometimes finding a different resolution, I would put it this way, because it varies depending on your scenario. And it all begins with Microsoft sending you a notice. And I encourage everybody, read your contract, please. I encourage you, find your SPLA and MBSA. There are two documents that contain the terms for SPLA audits. Read them carefully. Pay attention to detail. If you don't understand it, ask your legal. If your legal doesn't understand it, I wouldn't be surprised, by the way, send them to us. Microsoft is obliged contractually to send you notice 30 days prior to the audit. So they give you a 30-day warning. And by the way, if they try to insist on an audit to start in 1 or 2 weeks, that's against their own rules. They have to give you a 30-day notice. After that 30-day notice, audit is supposed to start. And normally, this is what will happen. Normally, you will have a kickoff call, and it's fine. You have a kickoff call, a meeting, handshake with the auditors. However, there are other things that you can do if you want to. There's an NDA phase, when you may want to sign an additional NDA with the auditor. Or, as we recently learned, some companies insist on signing a special agreement for the conduct of the audit itself with the auditor, and they succeed at that. Sometimes we are asked whether an audit could be entirely cancelled. We may imagine how, but we've never seen it. Because you are contractually obliged to respond to the notice. If you have ideas of how you may cancel your own audit, by all means, you may attempt to do so. When you sign the agreement, you agreed that Microsoft may send you an auditor. This is your contractual responsibility, at least to react to it. Never ignore the notice. You've got your notice. You're probably sweating. You don't know where to start. You're not necessarily ready, even if you have tools and everything. And the worst thing in the very beginning is being nervous and being agitated. So our advice is to everybody is just calm down. Nothing bad happened yet and may not even happen. Take a deep breath. Talk to somebody who knows about audits and how to go through them. Make sure that your house is in order. Will explain to you what it means, house is in order. And then set up the kickoff call and be calm. It's very important to have peace of mind. Otherwise, if you're nervous, you'll make mistakes. The first phase you can do is absolutely up to you, is you may insist on the auditor to sign a special NDA with you. As the MBSA, Microsoft Business and Services Agreement, says, there is already an NDA in place between Microsoft and the Microsoft's auditor. However, most of our clients, sometimes advised by us, sometimes on their own, for additional peace of mind, ask the auditors to sign an additional NDA. Please pay attention to this, because if you've been to our previous live events and webinars, we used to say there's no time limit on the NDA. There is a form of the MBSA, and you need to check your own MBSA, where it says that you only have 14 days to complete that process. So if your MBSA sets that limit, it's not in every MBSA, then you must comply. You only have 14 days to execute an NDA with the auditor. And you may not it's in the same paragraph. You may not use that to prevent an audit. You need to know, however, if that's a concern, that Microsoft does not receive raw data. Raw data stays between you and the auditor, and for some of you it may be very important. The raw data, the inventory with server names, IP addresses, usernames, if you disclose it, if you don't obfuscate it, it does not reach Microsoft. Microsoft gets a summary. Microsoft gets the result. Next, you have a kickoff meeting. So you've signed all the NDAs, you have a kickoff meeting. And what it is essentially is just the auditors walking you through the process, answering your questions, asking you initial questions. And the advice here is simple. Ask every question you want to ask and listen. We advise not to disclose information at this stage, even basic information. Because you may say you have 5 data centers, and during the audit you'll give data from 4 data centers. It will be recorded that you have 5 data centers, and you will have to explain it. So don't say anything at this stage at all, because mistakes could be absolutely, I'll use the word silly. Another thing to impress on everybody here is they will try to impose a specific project plan, a specific timeline of the audit. You don't have to comply with it. Don't sign it. You may tentatively agree because you need to somehow agree how this is going to go, but remember that's not your legal obligation to follow a specific project plan that a hypothetical auditor of Microsoft wants the project to follow. You don't have to agree to those particular dates and timeframes. Agree tentatively, but remember that you control the timeline. There are only 2 contractual dates at the beginning of the audit. One is 30 days from the notice letter. The other one is 14 days. It may or may not be in your MBSA to sign an NDA. Set your timelines with some flexibility. Make it easy for you. They will be chasing you. They will be sending you letters saying, you need to complete this in the next 10 days. You don't have to. By all means, maintain good relationship, but you don't have to. You need to remember that. Because many people are scared by auditors and by Microsoft, and they rush the data. They rush the results. Never rush the results. Do not, though, disappear. Maintain some sort of a heartbeat relationship. Send emails saying, this is where we are. This is the progress. Be honest. But you don't have to rush. Unfortunately, we have to tell it every day, almost every day, because at the moment, we support 10 providers, and all of them are uncomfortable pushing back on the auditors and Microsoft, and they shouldn't be. Absolutely shouldn't be. After the initial meeting, they'll give you a questionnaire, first of all, to fill, and they'll give you scripts to run. That's the data gathering stage. The questionnaire is essentially just basic questions from where you provide services, what kinds of services, what clusters do you have, which clusters are collocation, which clusters are SPLA. From October 2022, you can have a BYOL cluster, 100%. This is what they're asking you. And we suggest answer those questions as full as possible and double, triple check them. If you're unsure, ask a good independent advisor about how you should respond. And by the way, if you need a guidance for an audit, first of all, we have it on our website on SAMexpert.com. Secondly, if you'd like to have slides, reach out to me. You can message me, Alexander Golev. I hope we're connected on LinkedIn, and most of you will be connected to me already. DM me and I'll send you the slides with all this advice that we're talking about. One of the most important things at this phase, it's crucial, is do not overshare and make sure you only tell them about the actual SPLA scope. If you have colo clusters and colo data centers, our advice is don't even tell about them. Obviously, we will never advise you to hide anything. But if there's a part of your estate that is outside of scope of SPLA, and you are sure it's outside of scope of SPLA, don't even mention it. Because what happens, and it happened at least 3 times in the last year, is you will give them inventory from additional clusters with the virtual machines and whatever's running in those virtual machines. They will be added to the report. And now you have to ask them to delete that data from the report. And they're very hesitant to do so. Very hesitant to do so, because the next question they will ask is, show us evidence that it's out of scope. So if something is out of scope, don't share. Don't give it. It's very important to understand what you provide. Whether that's full collocation, or you only provide operating system licenses in a certain cluster to a certain client. If you run your own web applications that may be licensed with self-hosted licenses instead of SPLA, you need complete clarity. Again, if you don't know, ask somebody who knows about Microsoft licensing for providers, because it's a complicated area. It's not simple. SPLA is simple. Overall licensing for providers is probably the most complicated thing after Windows 11 licensing. If there's a story, by the way, if there's a story during the data gathering that you would like to share with the auditor, share it at this stage. And here's an example. If you upgraded processes a year ago, and it's not evident from the current VMware data that processes were different, and that's why you started reporting more, tell them that story. At least mention at this phase. Before you find the evidence, mention it to them. Say, by the way, in the data, you will see that all of our hosts have 56 cores. They used to have 40, but we upgraded processes last year. Please advise us what sort of information you require to prove it. Tell that story up front. If that is a story that protects you, tell that story up front. Again, if you have an advisor, run it past them. You may, and you will be asked to, you may need to find additional evidence and additional data. Customer contracts. They will want to see your customer contracts, especially when you claim that you're not responsible for licenses. That happens in every infrastructure provider, at least. I'm not talking about outsourcing companies. They have different arrangements. But when we're talking about hosting, there's lots of BYOL, and usually the best evidence is contractual records, change records. If something was migrated, deployed on a certain date, if you don't show that change to them, they will assume it's always been like this. And therefore, for your historical months, even if you were compliant, you'll look like you're non-compliant. So change records, anything relevant to changes in license reporting, find that. License verification forms. Fortunately, Microsoft in October 2022 effectively made license verification forms redundant. However, if you steal a license mobility partner, then you have to collect them. It's your contractual requirement. And for the period before October 2022, they still required. If you had clients with BYOL at the time, you should have collected those forms. Find them. Your reporting history. The easiest is just to ask your reseller or download it from their portal, all your reports, all your invoices, for the period that is in the notice letter. It happens more rarely recently than it was 5 years ago, but sometimes there are discrepancies between what you reported through your reseller and what Microsoft sees in their internal database. I'm not going to blame anyone, but it happens. People make mistakes. People may receive a report for September and attribute it to October. Microsoft won't see that. They will see double numbers. They won't accept them without an explanation. So you need to find your own reporting history, your own reports with all the months mentioned and all the details around it. Don't neglect it. And again, do not overshare. Only give what needs to be given. Don't talk too much. Everything you say may be used against you. I'm sorry. When you provided all the data to the auditors, they will go away for 2 to 4 weeks, sometimes longer. They will go away and they will calculate your first effective licensing position, your first report. That is your first ELP. ELP stands for effective licensing position. Normally, the initial draft ELP will have assumptions. Sometimes before that, by the way, I should have mentioned that, they may come back even before providing you the ELP and ask you to provide additional information and clarify certain things. That's a normal part of the process. Collaborate, provide all the necessary information. Again, be careful with what you say and how you formulate it, because anything you say can be used against you. What you also need to remember is that this is a very important point, is that although the auditor works for Microsoft, and don't take it wrong, they work for Microsoft, the report will be one-sided, just Microsoft's point of view of what you should have paid them, what you need to pay them to cover the so-called non-compliance gap. However, normally what we see is the auditor teams are pretty helpful as well. They won't tell you how to fix stuff, they won't tell you all the secrets, but if you ask the right questions, they normally help. They're not your friends, it must be very clear, They're not your enemies either. They're just there to perform what they're contracted to perform. So they've given you the first report, and what's your goal here? What's your task here? Is validation. Because things can go wrong. People make mistakes. There are still no fully automated ways to produce a report like that. So there's always a human behind it. And if it's a senior auditor, then normally there's not that much to validate in terms of formulas, errors, misinterpretations. If there's a junior on the project, we see gaps and omissions, and sometimes people taking shortcuts. So what do? You push back. You analyze meticulously, sometimes line by line, every single thing. You may remember something you forgot to tell. They may have forgotten that they made a mistake in a formula, which then again, if you check the formulas and you find that the formulas are incorrect, you just say, can you please fix it? And they will fix it. Do not just accept it at face value. Never. Not the first edition, at least. You may have to provide additional evidence. You may have to send them additional change records, something that you postponed, for example, asking your clients for evidence that your clients are responsible for licensing, because this is the phase, this is the time when it's most important that you have an absolutely clear picture of who is responsible for that particular SQL server, or who is supposed to provide licenses for this Office installed in the terminal server. The auditors will take this into account. Even when they don't like the evidence, they may put it as a shortfall again, but it will be attributed against the client. Make that very clear at this stage. There will be a validation call. It used to be an on-site visit, when auditors would come on site, sit with you together in a meeting room, and ask you, could you kindly log into this server? And they will give you names of the servers that they just randomly picked. Could you kindly log into this server, run the SQL Server Management Studio, and run this command so we can verify that the addition is correct? Could you please demonstrate to us that your clusters have indeed 9 hosts and not 11? And if they have 11, why? It's an audit. They will be verifying the data you provided, and it's an absolutely normal part of the process. What is very important to understand as well is that you may not just simply declare stuff. Everything needs to be evidenced. If there's a discrepancy, it raises questions. If you gave them a list of hypothetical 8,000 virtual machines, but during the on-site visit they will see 8,500 virtual machines, you need to be ready to answer the question why. This is a validation call. Now it happens over Teams or Zoom or whatever other communication platform of your preference. But I would assume in certain scenarios it could still be an on-site visit. So be ready for that as well. From this point on, it's all about chiseling off things that should not be in the LP and making sure that the technical position looks the best way possible. What you can't do at this stage at all is arguing about a business case, arguing about things that are outside of the remit of the auditor and that you need to discuss with Microsoft. So when you get to the point when there's not much to discuss and all the measures to improve the position are exhausted, then the auditors will ask you to sign the final report. We advise signing it in a way when you don't legally accept the results. You'll have a bit of a back and forth with them because they need you to legally accept the results. You don't want to legally accept the results. Find a formula that satisfies both parties and basically say, thank you, dear auditor, thank you for your work, we'll take it from here. The final summary is sent to Microsoft. Microsoft may be sometimes involved midway during the audit when there's an impasse or things that require involving Microsoft, but normally Microsoft engages when the auditor disengages. And that's when you start negotiating. Daryl, I'd like you to take over and talk about the negotiating phase. If you can, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alex. I want to just emphasize a number of things before I start talking about the second stage. And it's a crucial move from the technical evaluation to the commercial negotiations. And that is, and Alex pointed out, but I want to repeat it just for those of you that joined, is that whatever you don't finalize from a technical perspective, it's going to be very difficult to mitigate during the commercial discussions. And I want to emphasize that the number of technical errors that we have seen on an ongoing basis during the technical audit phase are substantial. And I'm not a very politically correct person, so I'll say this out really straight. Auditors make mistakes. Not intentional, but they make mistakes. They make formula mistakes, they misinterpret the data, and they work rigidly around Microsoft's framework. And that's not always the correct framework. It might be Microsoft, it might be a prestigious auditor, but again, the framework is not always in the favor of the provider. And that's something you need to keep in mind throughout that process. So you need to be vigilant. You need to be aware. You need to challenge every single assumption. If the auditor doesn't have information that they see as critical, they will assume and extrapolate. Extrapolation is tremendously detrimental to you because extrapolation uses a certain assumption that might not be correct looking back 3, and we've seen audits go back 5 years, actually longer now. We've got an audit that's going back 7 years. And if you start extrapolate going back, the numbers, because it's on a monthly basis, are huge. Challenge any extrapolation, challenge any assumption, bring evidence. That is your responsibility. Don't look to the auditor or to Microsoft to do your job. They will not dig in your favor, dig for information and evidence in your favor. You need to dig for evidence. It's just like being in court. If you do not provide that underlining hardcore evidence, being data, being maybe even contractual agreements with your end customers, emails between yourself and your reseller, emails between yourself and Microsoft, that's all evidence. The auditor might not be able to use every single piece of that evidence because it's not in the process or methodology determined by Microsoft, but it will be noted. And you will be able to use that information, that evidence, in the commercial negotiations with Microsoft. That's how important it is. Everything leads up to the commercial stage. Part of the data gathering is building up a really good story. Truthful, yet it needs to be a well-organized, logical story. Every commercial negotiation has a story behind it. Why did you reach the point that you reached? Why do you have a certain licensing gap? There is a reason behind it. There could be errors made by previous people in the organization. There could have been an underlying reason. You thought that a specific license came bundled with a third-party application that you were hosting, and you assumed that you had licenses. You might have assumed that your end customer intended, or it was agreed upon that they provide the bring your own license with their enterprise agreement contract. It was assumed. So you need to dig up the reasoning behind any potential gaps that the auditor finds. And there might be more than one story. It might be on a per customer basis. It might be on a per application basis. It's a lot of history gathering. It takes a lot of time and effort. Don't underestimate the resources and the time that is required. The more time and resources you put into this, the better prepared you're going to be. Like any negotiation, you need to prepare. This is not just jumping on a call with Microsoft and for them to present the auditor's results and say, okay, you need to pay €1 million or dollars. It's you preparing for that initial call with Microsoft. That's already negotiations. Negotiations actually have started with the auditor. That's the way I perceive negotiations. I negotiate day in, day out on behalf of our customers. And I am part of the early stage technical discussions when Alex and his team initiate the process. I am part of that. I am silent, but I listen very careful to read in between the lines. Where are the gaps? Where are the cracks? Why did things happen? How did they become what they were? How is it that a provider that is doing €1 million of business with Microsoft on SPLA a year has a 10 million commercial debt to Microsoft, or 20 million or even higher we've seen? How does that come about? Not because customers are trying to short Microsoft on what they're supposed to pay. I've done hundreds of audits, various types of audits. I've never seen a case where a customer, and we have NDAs and we have all the back end stories from the customers, that they have been short paying Microsoft intentionally. That's not the case. There are errors and mistakes that are made. And you, as the hosting provider or as the application hoster, you didn't benefit from it commercially. You did not see revenue and shorthanded Microsoft. That's a story. So please, when you enter into the negotiation stage, prepare for it. There are multiple stages that you need to go through in that preparation. Understand who you're talking with on Microsoft side. Who is the commercial negotiator? Who is that licensing executive that you are talking to? What is his experience, tenure at Microsoft? Who is he reporting into? It's good to understand the connections behind the lines. You need to plan out your strategy like any other negotiation. You need to set your targets, your red lines, the timeline. You want to drive the commercial negotiations. Don't be in a situation where Microsoft is driving the commercial negotiations. You want to be in the driver's seat. You want to set the tone of the negotiations from the start. This is not being aggressive. This is being attentive and being prepared for that stage. In addition, if I want to just go back one step, when you hand over the final licensing positioning report, or when the auditor hands over that final licensing positioning report to Microsoft, you have the right to ask to add notes, clarification, and evidence to that report. So it's not just handed over to Microsoft as a black and white, basically it's an Excel sheet. You want to add on additional color. You want to keep it as a live document where every single line item that you want to discuss with Microsoft or challenge, you want to have an underlying reason why you don't agree. You want to have an underlying layer of evidence so that when that information, that report is delivered to Microsoft, you are starting the discussions with everything on the table. You have your side of the story already presented. Doesn't mean Microsoft's going to accept it. That is when the negotiations start. I want to just leave you with the most important understanding of this process. There is a negotiation phase, a commercial negotiation phase. You need to come prepared and do your internal due diligence. You need to have the right people on the call. You need to have an experienced negotiator from your team that can lead the process. You need to have your licensing manager on the call. You need to have somebody from legal and somebody from finance, because you're not only looking at potentially paying for the audit fees. They are usually substantial, but they can be reduced by double-digit percentage points. You also have potential fines, and you also have the auditor's fees. So if you read through your SPLA contract, and as Alex recommended, and I highly recommend that you actually read through your contracts today, not when you get the audit, but today, understand that there are penalties for under licensing. In addition, you might be open to an additional audit within a period of 12 to 24 months to validate that you've corrected errors and omissions. So it potentially can become an ongoing audit cycle that you definitely don't want to be there. Auditors' fees, that's also potentially negotiable with Microsoft. There are a lot of negotiables that can be put on the table. It's all a question of presenting them in the right context with the right story and evidence.
Yes, thank you, Daryl. I'd like to invite my old friend, actually, Dmitry, to speak.
Hello, everybody. Hello, Alexander. Hello, Daryl. Thanks for inviting. My name is Dmitry Beresnev. I was actually the guy leading the audit efforts for Microsoft for a big region for many years. We were on the opposite sides of the fence with the guys, but I wanted to join out of pure human feelings of respect to their professionalism and give a couple of advice from the kind of ex-Microsoft guy. I'm no longer with the company. Look, for many managers, both in the auditor company and in Microsoft, it is just a job and not the most pleasant one. Because as you can imagine, not all the clients are polite and positive. The first advice is be polite and be responsive. Most managers are tasked with reporting progress and lack normal human attitude from the clients. That would really help you establish a good report. And even if the real progress of the audit is zero, but you are constantly in contact, that goes a long way. Second, be genuine, tell the truth. It's not the right situation to exercise your imagination. Just don't. It's not a fair game for you to try to say something that is not true against the person who is doing this every day for many years. That doesn't bring you any value at all.
So you're basically saying, sorry for interrupting, you're basically saying, we know all the tricks, just be honest and tell your story how it is.
You're not in the court still. It's not, maybe my third point will explain this better. So the third point is be elegant. What I mean by that is that if the negotiations are done in a nice manner, if you have good explanations for everything, they're genuine and they can be validated with the data. If you are in dialogue, especially if someone is helping you professionally to check whether what you are saying is valid, it can be said, then I've seen examples of technical discussions leading to more than 50% reduction in the gap in the licenses and business discussions leading to more than 80% reductions. Having a good story that is not fiction, that can be verified, nice, positive, beautiful negotiations are something that people on the opposite side of the audit see very rarely, and believe me, they value it very much. Because if you have 10 shitty negotiations every day with the same scenario of lies and impolite attitude, and then suddenly you see someone being able to tell their story, to explain why they want to reduce the amounts and what other steps towards than they would expect of both the auditor and the license owner like Microsoft. That goes a long way. That goes a huge way and gives you really a huge advantage. Those are the three things I would share as a former lead of the team doing the audits.
Thank you, Dmitry. Thanks very much. We absolutely agree that on average, a good technical discussion shaves off 50% from the assumptive draft report, and then the commercial negotiations can save you on average again 80% of the report, because Microsoft will listen. I would also completely agree with being professional during the negotiations. You get much better response, you get smoother negotiations. We see sometimes that the auditors send an email to the client with whom we work, thanking them for the professional contact during the audit. It really goes a long way, being that professional, answering the questions with the right language, having the right attitude.
Alex, if I can just jump in, I want to just comment on one of the things that Dmitry said, and I couldn't agree more. Don't come with a bullshit story. The auditors and Microsoft have heard everything. Be genuine. Build your story based on evidence. If there is a reason, a good reason, that something happened, that you made an error, we have found that presenting it in a professional way based on evidence goes a long way in the process. Prepare, be genuine. You don't have to say everything that you think about, okay? This is not a legal discussion, but be able to back it by evidence. It goes a long way than just throwing things out there that have no substance, that can be dismissed really quickly. So again, I want to say thank you to Dmitry, because there were some really important points there that I advise everybody to take home and implement in the next audit. So thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I would like to remind you that we have another SPLA-related event talking about your initial preparation phases when you gather everything for the start of the audit, and we'll go more in depth on the initial steps that save up to 30% of the audit fees if done properly. Thanks again. Have a great rest of the day. We'll see you soon. Goodbye.